appreciate you taking the time to visit with us about rural and ag issues. And so I'll introduce you, let you introduce yourself and give an opening speech, and then we'll go to the questions.
Sounds great. No, and it's great to be with all of you for sure. You know, I think many of you know my background. 4 years as Attorney General, 8 years as governor, actually bringing folks together to get things done. And that's everything from when we look at, when I first came in as Attorney General, seeing what producers have to deal with market concentration and forward contracts. So starting the first ever farm division in the Attorney General's office, to, while I was governor, actually working with folks, Democrats and Republicans, be it record investments in our public education system, freezing college tuition, Medicaid expansion, which really threw a lifeline to our rural hospitals, largest infrastructure bill in our state's history last time, saying that a lot of money needs to be going to rural areas and more. And I think, look, at the end of the day, if we could make Washington work a little bit more like Montana, we'd all be in much better stead. And I don't think I'm doing this because I hear from folks all across the state that they're frustrated in DC and they don't feel like Steve Daines is representing their interests. So I'm excited about this race and excited about having the conversation with you all this evening.
Well, I'll start off, and I'm kind of adding a question here. You know, last week I was out at a neighbor's checking out their hemp harvest, and they were driving a newer model combine. And as they were driving back to the field, the combine suddenly stopped moving. He said something has been acting up with that combine, controls all harvest, and now it has stopped moving. He will need to have a dealer come out to troubleshoot because he does not have the right to repair his own combine. I had the same thing happen to my tractor during haying this year. The manufacturers refuse to sell or will charge cost prohibitive prices for the diagnostic software required to troubleshoot our own equipment. The trade war with China was mostly about intellectual property. We lost markets so companies can build their technology in China. Now these same companies are refusing us the right to repair our own equipment. Now many states have proposed legislation that forces companies to allow farmers the right to repair. What will you do to force these companies to allow us the right to repair our own equipment?
Yeah, look, and first, I'll say in my experience that our farmers and ranchers really have the ability to repair just about any equipment they touch. It's a fundamental part of life in rural Montana, but it is getting more and more complex. And the machinery in there, it's not just fixing an engine, it's computer programming. For a company to sell you a piece of equipment and tell you then you can't try to repair it if it breaks, or you can only go not to the local dealer or the local repair shop, but actually have to have either just the manufacturer or otherwise, is absurd. These clauses are just another way for out-of-state corporations to try to back Montana farmers in the corner and actually have them pay a heck of a lot more for services than they otherwise would. Thinking, and it's not just the ag industry. I mean, I was up at Bergeron's in Havre just last Sunday, you know, auto repair. And look, they get worried about, they can't fix today's machines because they immediately have to go directly to the dealer. It impacts the consumer. It impacts the small business person. It impacts the farmers and ranchers. Those are bad policies for Montana. Look, Steve Daines, though, is also, he's taken money from the corporate PACs and support limiting the farmer or rancher's right to repair equipment. Our campaign isn't taking any money from corporate PACs and not from anybody that wants to make farmers and ranchers actually go after you already paid a heck of a lot for that piece of equipment to only get it serviced by that piece of equipment. So I'm going to fight for right to repair. I think it's good for Montana businesses. It's good for Montana consumers, and it's good for Montana farmers and ranchers.
I hope you get to do that. Alice Miller from Guilford, would you introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi there, Governor. Alice Miller here. We farm and ranch in Guilford, so not far from Havre, where you were. And I want to touch on the Postal Service and some delays and impacts that we have been experiencing on our end. Obviously, we rely on it for a lot of things. With COVID, you know, my daughter's school was via a packet of schoolwork for the week that came in our mail. And we rely on it for our checks from our buyers, for our contracts from the elevators. People rely on it for prescription medications, parts, all kinds of things. So now that I've underscored what you already know about its importance, what will you do to support maintaining a reliable and consistent postal service? And what can we do to help you in that?
No, Alice, as you note, right, that like not only for instruction, but especially in rural Montana, the Postal Service is the one thing that you could always rely on to get your checks or your prescription drugs. And we've seen just in the last 5 months, really trying to dismantle the U.S. Postal Service. Look, this isn't just some additional government agency. This is actually included in the U.S. Constitution. And if you're going to take away hours from our Postal Service officers so they can't actually deliver all of their mail in one day, if you're going to remove sorting machines, if you're going to do all of that, you can't just do it by appointing one of your cronies, this DeJoy, and all of a sudden taking that apart. I mean, there are steps that were taken along the way already damaging this that are unlawful. That's why I actually sued in federal court and said, not just you have to stop what you've done, but you actually have to restore it back to where it was. And a hearing on that, Montana specific, I think is in about 2.5 weeks. But we've also seen that action in other states saying, not just let's put a pause, but more than just that. I mean, this is something that, you know, we don't have toll roads all through rural Montana thinking that every single government service has to be making a profit. There are some things that we expect government to be paying for, and the Postal Service is one of them. So when in the U.S. Senate, I'm going to bring the voice of rural Montana, rural America, but I think all of us that rely on the Postal Service to make sure that it continues to be that institution that has served this nation and our state so well for centuries, and it's not time to be dismantling it just because a different administration comes in.
Governor, do you see specific steps that need to be taken to ensure the Postal Service's viable continuation, even as a government service? And how would you act on those if elected?
Yeah, Alice, first, undoing the wrong, right? Undoing the wrong of removing blue boxes, of making it so that postal carriers who used to actually deliver all the mail that they had that day, and under the current postmaster said, no, you're not even supposed to finish it during that day. Making sure that they have the ability to do so. These sorting machines, putting them back and restoring them. So undoing the wrong, but more than that, that all of a sudden, as of late, that it has been turned around and said, look, Postal Service has to make a profit. And this is a base community service that we expect from government. Yes, the world's changed with email, with other sort of carriers, but that doesn't cover that base government service that we expect and anticipate. So at the end of the day, it actually comes back down also to funding it at that level so we can continue to have the reliable service, not just in our urban areas, but also in our rural areas.
Makes sense to me. Eric Sommerfeld?
Yeah, thanks, Governor. Trade wars with our largest customers have had a huge impact on Montana producers. We've had problems with the bilateral agreement with Japan, and our competitors' abilities in Brazil and Australia have better stuff with TPP than we've got in that. We've got problems with Canada and them being able to dump anything and everything here into the US compared to us not being able to deliver wheat. I'm 90 miles from the border.
Well, it downgraded as far as it could, sure.
Yeah, I can't haul my variety because it's not approved up into Canada, but they can bring anything and everything they want down here. The phase one deal with China means nothing. They agreed to basically do nothing with it, and it's showing they're not importing what they anywhere close to agreed to. What will you do to help build back our markets that we spent tons and tons of money trying to build and get them? What will you do to bring those foreign markets back? Because they're vitally important in our wheat and beef especially.
Absolutely, Eric. I mean, I think that all of you want price predictability in markets, right? As one farmer once said, if Montanans had to eat all the wheat that we produce, every living Montanan would be eating 40 loaves of bread a day. So look, we rely on those international markets, but we also rely on predictability going forward. My position on international trade will always come back to what's right for Montanans and Montana farmers. We know that our beef is superior to most products, and recognizing, as you note, that all the promises that were made about China, I've yet to meet a rancher that says this is all taken care of now. And we also know, and I've seen that not only, at times the ag industry, and you stated it more or less, is left behind, meaning that USMCA 2, that didn't help Montana farmers when it comes to the grading of wheat just right up north to you. And we have a brand here. We not only have the greatest product, but we also have a brand that is Montana because they know what you all produce is superior. So country of origin labeling should be part of all of this. It's more information for consumers to make those informed decisions. And so much of the trade war that's been engaged in really has been unnecessary. We have to make sure that, and even if you look at those payments that were made to compensate for that trade war, it's been disproportionately been allocated to the larger, wealthier farmers and the corn and dairy producers, both fairly uncommon in Montana. So we need to actually de-escalate the trade disputes. We have to get back to that predictability, but we also have to make sure that it works for Montana. And I'd also say that, as you know, you put a heck of a lot of work into developing these markets. I think of Mike O'Hara, right, that went down to Mexico. He has grain cattle operation outside of Fort Benton. To actually meet with many of the big malt buyers, or when I went down as National Governor Association chair for the inauguration of the new president, took time to meet with all the craft brewers associations down there. So we build those markets, and then every single trade deal we have to look directly at what's it going to be doing to our producers and our Montana workers along the way, and that's what I'll be doing.
Good.
So Ben Peterson, he's a diversified farmer from Judith Gap. He raises cattle, sheep, grain, hay, and he's got a question for you. Ben?
First off, I apologize if it's a little hard to hear me with this background noise. I'm in my tractor seating. But I want to talk about JBS's acquisition of Mountain States Rosen Lamb Processing Plant. JBS is the largest importer of lamb to the U.S. Mountain States Rosen represented 20% of the processing power of lamb in the U.S., and it serves 15 states, including Montana. this is obviously a blatant attempt by a foreign national company to buy out and eliminate competition for domestic meat products. I forgot to tell you that they're basically stopping that plant for processing meat and turning it into beef. So that's 20% of the processing in the U.S. is gone for lamb. And lamb demand domestically has been on a rise for about 5 years now, maybe 4. Anyhow, my lamb prices didn't get impacted in a few days or a month or two. They got impacted that day. My price for that lamb literally went down 20%, and I had to market my lambs at that market less than a month at that. Pretty much all that seems to ever happen in Congress is somebody sends a letter, whether it's to USDA or to the Justice Department. What can you do about this that actually will make an impact before this actually puts me out of the lamb business?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Jess, because look, the Packers and Stockyard Act of 1921 was actually put together at a time where there was significant market concentration. Now there's actually less packers and greater market concentration. And what JBS did to you with MSR has happened in so many different areas. So it's got to be more than a letter. Look, this is something that I started working on 12 years ago when I was Attorney General, hoping to actually get GIPSA reform. We've got to change the standards for antitrust to make it similar to where it is everywhere else, but it's actually a heck of a lot worse for the ag industry and for packing. And so it's got to be actual enforcement, changing the federal laws to more even out the landscape, but also then foster the innovation that I've been seeing from producers all my life. Like I think of during this time of COVID, where we've been trying to promote food security, make sure that you have a price. I think we've now put $12 million into 60 different processing, albeit smaller, businesses all across our state, looking at what we can do with co-ops along the way. So actually more of the food dollar, because the whole thing of this is the more of the food dollar that we can keep in Montana, the more of that food dollar you're also going to be spending in your local communities, which is really at the heart of keeping rural vibrancy. Long way to say, we actually do have to start enforcement. We have to change the federal laws. We have to give the Packers and Stockyard Act a new set of teeth, because now candidly, it's just a set of dentures at this point. And when you're looking at foreign entities, be it JBS or Smithfield that came in from China, you actually got to look at what these foreign entities are trying to do to the markets that we have. They should not be allowed to complete a purchase designed to make folks like you and Montana producers less competitive. And we need that strong oversight enough to ensure that not only are we enforcing, but we're protecting American producers.
So our next question is going to come from a board member we have over in Ronan, Jan Tusik.
Well, good evening, Governor Bullock. Thank you for this opportunity to visit with you. My husband and I have a small sheep operation south of Polson, and I'm the center director for the Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center and the past director for Lake County Community Development's Cooperative Development Center. So with that, I think we've learned that in challenging times, family farmers come together to solve their problems with cooperative solutions. And with the pandemic is increased the importance to support farmers and ranchers. They look to work together in cooperative models in food processing, distribution, and market supply needs. We have some opportunities here in Montana with new products such as hemp, and we have groups that are looking at forming cooperatives to meet and enter those market opportunities. So I guess my question to you as our new potential representative, yay, go Steve, is is that what will you do to support the USDA Rural Development Cooperative Development Program? Because it does need to be expanded. It needs to be more modeled so it works effectively for cooperatives. And what new capital opportunities might be launched to move new value-added ventures forward that are organized as a cooperative?
Yeah, and Janice, you even talk about what's been done at Mission Mountain and the work that's been done already on the ground. Has been significant, but increasing sort of the support for producer co-ops, it is a win-win for Montana producers. We've seen producers successfully establish co-ops for the sake of processing, for marketing, for distributing. And you look at, like, in emerging markets, pulse crops. We signed tax incentives for construction, equipment of operation of those processing plants to keep them here. So I certainly fully support the USDA rural development effort to help Montana producers establish co-ops, proponent of keeping as many in the food supply chain as possible, because they're a great way for our producers to do just that, retain that economic benefit, keep more of the food dollar here. And I'm also glad that you brought up hemp, because I think our experience with hemp illustrates a point that I'd like to make. Like, over these last few years, under our leadership, Montana's become a top hemp state in the country. We did that while still complying with every law on the books, but at times federal bureaucracy is holding us back. You guys are incredible innovators. You have to have both the tools available to you and the laws and the support. And that's something that I'm committed to doing as your next senator.
Thank you.
So you've been kind of dancing around this next question I'm going to ask, but I first want to thank you, Governor Bullock, for the meat cutters grants, taking some of that money from the COVID dollars and focusing on upgrading our custom butcher plants, upgrading our state inspected plants. Thank you for doing that. But I want to just have you share some of your experiences working with farmers, ranchers, and the rural communities, if you would.
Yeah, and it was those experiences that, I mean, it was me hearing from you, not me telling you what you need, that even when I was Attorney General, we forget about the lack of transparency in forward contracts. We're still fighting the issues of consolidation. But that's what led my efforts when I was Attorney General to actually hire someone that was an ag lawyer to address some of this stuff. And then even greater than that, look, I've worked in all corners, you know, it's like as Jan says, that Mission Mountain and knowing our food development centers, not just funded and supported them, but visited and learned from them. When we looked at a Main Street Montana project of saying, how do we grow areas along the way? During the first term, yeah, we looked at aggregate, but during the second term, we made it a rural partners program and said, let's go to communities and not say we're from Helena and we're here to help you, but say, let's bring all the community stakeholders together and say, how do we grow and do better? I've learned a lot as we've traveled when we were getting Medicaid expansion through, knowing that if you lose that rural hospital, that community is gone. So it's been, as a lifelong Montanan and someone that has spent time everywhere from, of course, Helena, where I was raised, to Geyser, where you were raised, Walt. Every time I think I've learned more than I've given, but really the foundation and fabric of Montana really is our rural areas. And we can't lose that along the way. And it's an important lesson that I'll take to Washington, D.C.
So Alice has got a pretty important question that she wants to ask. You're
muted, Alice.
Sorry, my daughter's watching this with me, so I figured it was best to mute.
How old's your daughter?
6.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. So, hey, we talked about the Postal Service. Now let's talk about broadband. So obviously our schools having to make the switch to online really shone a light on how important that is for our family structure. the person who wrote this question is actually from over Chinook area, I believe. And so she says, in our district, broadband access stops just past the school, and most of our students don't have access to internet beyond expensive hotspots, which are generally limited. Reliable connectivity also allows for telehealth access at a time when services are more critical than ever before. Farmers can use smart ag programs more effectively to better plan and market their crops with fast connections. We've experienced this firsthand. It makes a huge difference in the technologies that we're willing to invest in, and just that real-time data is so critical to making real-time decisions, especially with a commodity market that fluctuates. And so we've talked about all these benefits for, it seems like, years, which has been years, and yet we still haven't seen widespread access. So how do you take this song and dance of we're bringing broadband, we're supporting these initiatives, and turn that into concrete actions that will benefit our rural communities?
No, you bet. And thanks for the question, Alice. And look, even before COVID, like you go back 4 years ago, only 75% of the schools in Montana were connected at FCC minimums. That's something that I worked on, and it's actually both on price and connectivity. We're up to about 100% of our schools, or we are up to 100%. And usually what they're paying is about half of what they were prior to this. So we made some great gains. But as you pointed out too, is when all of a sudden education is no longer going to be in the classroom and it's going to be in your kitchen or your dining room, it underscored what people in Montana have known in rural areas for a long time. Connectivity is so critical for business today. It can be so critical for education. And I think we'll also, on the back end of this, hopefully learned about providing medical services that you can do things with telemedicine that not even the doctors ever thought that you could, and really opens up great opportunities. But none of that matters or works if you don't have that base level of connection. And it's something that I certainly am going to fight for. You know, even before COVID-19, I said, one of the things when I first came in, I think we need a significant infrastructure bill. Not only because it creates good jobs, not only because the needs are there, but also because if we can't get Democrats and Republicans in Washington to agree on the need to be invested in our communities through infrastructure, then I don't know how we ever fix it. As part of that, then, that national infrastructure program, and I've talked to some of the other senators about this as well, rural broadband will be a part of that. Because it may not, may not always be cost effective for that private producer or that private person that's laying the cable, but this is an area where we have to make sure that it's a public-private partnership and significant federal dollars are invested, because that's how we keep not only our schools, not only your business, but the connectivity that we all have to have now in this digital economy. It cannot be limited to just our urban areas. You can count on me in that first 100 days as part of it to have a significant rural broadband investment, because that's base infrastructure to keep our communities alive.
Do you think that you can convince other leaders in Washington that this is a rural issue as well as an urban one? And what argument would you make other than what you've already said that might be effective in doing that?
I do, Alice, because I mean, and look, there are rural areas, not just in Montana, but in New York State. And what COVID really did lay bare is the digital divide based on zip code. So look, I'm optimistic. Maybe I enter in that with a little bit of not naivete, but idealism, that we have to learn some lessons through COVID-19. Lessons that you and others have known all along, but it's that you're not going to have quality education opportunities, you're not going to have quality business opportunities in today's economy if you don't have that connectivity. And I think when you look, when we talk about a big infrastructure bill, I have no doubt that there'll be some senators saying this is what we need in the greatest urban areas. How things actually get done is saying, well, then if that's what you all want, this is what I want and we want. So I am optimistic that we will finally get to the point where we're addressing rural broadband and connectivity and doing so with a significant infusion of federal dollars.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So hopefully we got Ben, he's out in the field farming. So Ben, you've got a question?
Yeah, you've already danced around this a bunch of times, but what do you think you said about learning lessons for COVID? One of those lessons we need to learn pretty hardcore is food safety or food security. The packet plant's having to shut down and so few things. Like I said, you've already talked about this to a degree, but if you expand on that, how would you do this when you get to Congress? How do you plan on reforming those rules, enforcing those laws, and so forth? Thank you.
No, and I appreciate it because it is one of those that, look, this laid it bare, both the challenges along the way, COVID did, but it's challenges that we've known have always existed. And the more of the food, there's a reason why then we've invested $12 million into local processing along the way. More of those dollars have to be there. And I think back to, boy, it's probably April of this year, writing to Secretary Perdue saying, food security, we have great inspectors. We ought to be able to sell across state lines, and getting rejected by that. Keeping our food dollar here is everything from the co-ops to the local processors, but then reforming the laws so that we know that this Montana product can be safely sold elsewhere. Well, locally, we're actually eating more, and we know it's actually ours through country of origin labeling, but keeping more both of the food dollar there, and food security requires the ability to actually process both our grains and our animals right here in Montana. Just as I've done as governor, I'll be pushing for that in DC.
You brought up country of origin labeling. You know, these multinational packers, these corporate monopolies manipulated Congress into repealing country of origin labeling for beef and pork. We have it for all other food. Look at the back of your shirt. You know where that shirt came from. But beef and pork, we don't know. It can be from Brazil. And then they add this product of US label that could actually be hamburger coming in from Brazil, transferred into a smaller package, and they stick product of USA. Are you going to support Senator John Tester in the fight to reinstate mandatory cool?
Absolutely. When Congress repealed cool, right, it claimed to be doing so because, oh, the WTO threatened this big fine. Montana producers have lost actually more than what that fine would have been. If I was in Congress in 2015, I wouldn't have voted for the repeal of it. And I will work with Senator Tester closely to get it done. It is also because we have become a brand. I mean, folks all across this country and across this world will pay more because they know it's made in Montana. And by the same token, I don't care if I'm going down the local grocery store here or it's elsewhere, we ought to be knowing what we're eating and where that's coming from.
Couldn't agree with you more. Alice, you've got a question.
I do, and I'm off mute. Thanks. Hey, suicide is obviously a huge concern within our ag community, the state as a whole as well. You know, locally, we've lost 3 producers in just the last 2 years, and it's heartbreaking for the broader community and for their family and loved ones. And it's just got to stop. So would you please tell us how you will increase access to healthcare and mental health services in rural communities, both right now, as you're elected, as COVID-19 presumably will continue and increase all those stressors, but then also how will you increase access for those services in the long term?
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Allison. Thanks for bringing it up, because it really is critical all across our state, not just in rural areas, but you can be extremely hard hit at times. And you think about, like, when I turn around and say, we expanded Medicaid to 90,000 Montanans, that wasn't just the physical health. That was the first time that many people actually had preventative care with mental health and addressing substance use disorders. The challenges in rural areas are different. I mean, we started, while I was governor, actually funded a psychiatric residency, because we know actually that if somebody gets their training in Montana, in a rural area, they're much more likely to stay. We've done things called Project Echo, telemedicine, and working actually with providers in Billings that are then bringing people together in our rural communities to try to provide the same access to care that folks would have in our urban areas. So look, making sure that insurance, Medicaid, Medicare is the first start to getting there. Making sure that the accesses that you have in the funding streams can be different as well. I mean, we have to keep our critical access hospitals and our local providers there and provide them the dollars to do so. But there's also other pieces, and we have consistently fought as governor for increased mental health. I've consistently fought for targeted dollars just to address suicide. But we also got to recognize that parts of it is also, the economic stressors and the rest of the things along. Too many farmers are, you look at the number of farm bankruptcies that have gone up just in this last few years. I think it's about 150% of what it was before. And when you're held captive by the price of inputs, you're forced to assume more and more economic risk. We need a food system that makes farming safer and more profitable. I'll fight for that in the US Senate. Senator Tester has done a lot of work on farmers' mental health and suicide prevention, including introducing legislation that would require USDA employees to certainly get more training in detecting that stress and suicide prevention. But it's got to be more than that, too. It really has to be the same sort of efforts that we've made at the state level, recognizing that across our state, and across our country in rural areas for farmers and ranchers, that we have to ensure that you have access to care. That care has to be, back to your first question, at times where it's by telemedicine. You have to have the connectivity for care, and you have to have the ability to actually recognize and detect some of those stressors before someone gets to the point of thinking about taking their life.
So Jan Tusik has another question here.
Thank you. Well, I would like to address one question that is, you've discussed numerous aspects of the consolidation of our agricultural system, but what I'd like to ask is what you will do to support very important programs that are supporting local food development and sustainability in our nation. Programs like that are in the Farm Bill right now, the Local Food Promotion Grant, the Farmers Market Promotion Grant, the funding for SNAP, so we can ensure that people have access to their food stamps that can be used at farmers markets. And so my concern is, as we continue forward and maybe not have change of leadership, that these programs might be under attack when we go to revive or address a new farm bill in the future. So how would you actively promote programs at the federal level that will ensure that we at the state level have the tools to continue to build healthy local Montana food systems?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jan. It's funny, wasn't even looking at what my evening schedule was, but Lisa this morning put on a shirt that she got from more or less a co-op and effort in the Flathead that says, "Who's your farmer?" And
Right.
she said that she's actually gotten more comments about that, all across town. Like, look, we want to know who our farmer is and where that comes from. And there's a reason why, even as we worked on addressing childhood hunger in Montana, we also tried to get more local foods into our K-12 schools and actually increase substantially what the university system was buying along the way. And it's both for the food security, but it's also for keeping more of the food dollar at home. And the work that you've done, but the work that so many of you have done, is what needs to be shown up and exemplified. Now, I want to believe, just as I've gotten things done in our state legislature with people I don't always agree with, that the art of actually compromise and the ability to bring people together on some things still does exist. So even if, look, just as I did with President Obama, I worked with him, but I stood up against him when I didn't think it was in the best interests of Montana. If President Trump is reelected, I'll work with him where it's in the best interest for Montana, but also stand up for Montana's voices. And when we look at a new farm bill and we look at the gains that we've made so far, be that with SNAP, be it with being able to buy from our local farmers markets, be it with the co-ops, we can't take steps back, not only because the farmers lose, but then Montanans lose as well. So I will, as I have in the past, learn and listen to so many of you as far as what that farm bill needs that would actually address Montana and Montanans' needs, not Big Ag's needs.
Thank you.
To that point, Governor, I'm a young farmer. You know that. And when I first started farming, Montana produced and processed 70% of the food we ate. I could go to my local grocery store in my local community, and the food shelves were full of Montana food. And now we process like 7 to 10% of the food we eat. This is wrong. And it's because of a cheap food policy. A cheap food policy that was started in the 60s and ramped up in the 70s. And the cheap food policy is about corporate control of our food dollar. And we need a fundamental change in Washington, D.C. to make sure that it's more about food security for everyone in the United States, not just for the corporations.
Yeah, well, I will only add on to that in some respects, you are a young farmer. Like when you look at, no, in point of fact, like when you look at sort of the age of our farmers, and that's one of the reasons why every single year through the Department of Ag, as we bring young farmers and ranchers from all across the state together to meet one another, that I've insisted or asked our Department of Ag, let me spend a little bit of time talking with them. It's one of the reasons why, well, it could be more. We actually got student loan repayment through our legislature for some of our producers in a limited amount of money, but we ought to be able to make sure that anybody that is saying, you know what, I want to continue to live and produce foods for not just Montana, but the world, has those opportunities along the way. To your greater issue that, look, it is one where we've seen concentration in every single area. And time again, when we're seeing that concentration, it's not just the local producer that loses, it's the local community that loses. Everything that we can do to try to keep more of our food dollar closer to home, That's with the processing. That's with selling locally. And it's providing those avenues and alternatives. It's better for our communities, it's better for our population, and it's better for the sustenance and continued viability to keep the family in family farm.
So the next question was going to be from Alice, but you've answered this question a couple of times already in your comments. So I'm going to ask the next one here. And you know, one sector of agriculture that has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic are biofuels, which have been vitally important part of the farm economy. Biofuels play a critical role in making fuel burn cleaner and help clean the air we breathe. Biofuels are sustainable and they help decrease our dependence on foreign oil. The EPA's small refinery waivers undercut the renewable fuel standard. If the efforts of the pandemic wind down, even when the efforts, without specific assistance for biofuels, there could be a serious long-term damage to industry. You know, clean air during this COVID pandemic is critically important. And so what will you do to support biofuels and cleaner air?
Yeah, and while even stepping back, like I'll never forget going through at MSU Northern, looking at the research they were doing to make jet fuel out of biofuels, and what opportunities this is for our producers, but for our environment. Now, let's be honest here. There is no such thing as a small refinery waiver under this administration. I mean, when Exxon is getting it, when others are. So the system has really been completely upended in as much as everybody's gotten the waivers. So it takes what should have been with good actual policy before to be using the biofuels, and it is completely upended it over the last few years. So certainly I'll oppose EPA small refinery waivers because they are undercutting the renewable fuel standards. We all expect to have, it's the clean air and clean water that drives what you all do. And I'll press for additional opportunities for Montana farmers to profit from those solutions like biofuel that clean our air, they reduce carbon pollution, and put more money in the pockets of Montana farmers.
You know, to follow up with that, Jan's got a question about climate change. Jan?
Thank you. Well, Governor Bullock, I just really appreciate the efforts you have given and how proactive you have been in building resources to fight wildfires here in Montana. And we know that climate change is a direct cause of our nation's wildfires. And I would like you to speak to how you will proactively support climate change legislation at the national level.
Yeah, Jan, and thanks for the question. I mean, yeah, our fire seasons are 40 days longer than they were 30 years ago. You all see your planting seasons change. We know that we have to take steps along the way. And I think that, you know, we have to look at this as a climate opportunity, right? An opportunity to create good jobs and also not leave communities behind. I put together a Climate Solutions Council with diverse stakeholders because that's the way we do things in Montana. So we bring folks around the table that may not always agree on everything, and then we find a path. We committed to, for Montana, to essentially the Paris Accord standards of actually getting to there. And what people overlook is even with that State Climate Solutions Council, 40 out of the 50 recommendations with a diverse group of things, steps that we can start taking today were unanimous. All the stakeholders agreed. So I think we need to look, we've doubled our wind in Montana. We've quadrupled our solar just in the last handful of years with the same amount in the pipeline. this is an opportunity to create good jobs along the way. Going back, I think, to Alice's question about what an infrastructure bill can be, like the most antiquated piece of machinery in the West, probably other than something on one of Walt's farms, is the grid, right? It can't even, we don't have the ability right now because we are an exporter of energy. To the greater question though, Jan, is that I'm going to let science guide it again and say that we know the steps that we need to take and we can do it. Step one certainly is rejoining Paris. Step two is, look, not even the auto industry wanted to get rid of these fuel efficiency standards. We know that the energy that we don't use is often some of the most important. So invest in the energy conservation. I think that, we talk about, I had often said, and we forget, like the first George H.W. Bush, the first Bush in the presidency, said, we're going to address the greenhouse effect with the White House effect. Meaning there was a Republican president decades ago that said, we got to do something about this, and I'll lead from the top. Climate and addressing the impacts ought to be a bipartisan issue. And there are so many that are actually addressing that as a bipartisan issue. Now, Steve Daines, I think, has voted 4 times against even acknowledging that the climate is impacted by human activity. We could be a lot better served in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
To follow up with that, Governor, agriculture can be a big part of mitigating climate change. I mean, if you look at the cornfields in the Midwest, they tie up more CO2 than the rainforests in Brazil. And healthy soil that's full of microbes and activity, it captures those greenhouse gases, helping to mitigate climate change. And with just a little bit of incentive, farmers would rock and roll and be able to capture more of this greenhouse gas than anybody else out there just by farming. And so, what can you do to help us?
Well, I think that's actually, we do have to look at that. Look at what like no-till has done along the way and so many steps. And so many times you were looking at programs like, I think, and you all would know better than me, I think CRP was originally put in for price stabilization. The greatest conservationists out there are our farmers, because they expect this land not just for today, but for generations. So anytime that we can incentivize and help incentivize the better practices that are actually better for your soils long-term, better for what we produce, and better for our climate, we'll be doing so.
Well, I do appreciate your time. Is there anybody else that's got any other questions? I don't see any. So Alice is grabbing there. You got a question? Nope. Okay. So why don't you wrap it up, Governor?
No, I mean, thanks for this time together. Look, I think that the best solutions and the best ideas for Montana, and this has been my experience in 8 years, it actually comes from people on the ground that's living this every single day. And that's the way that we need to go forward. We got to make Washington, D.C. so it's not just about the special interests and the corporations, that our voices have to be heard and then implemented. Montana is such a special place. It's been given me such a gift, and I want to preserve and enhance that Montana, not just for today, but for future generations. So appreciate you all taking the time with me today. But more important, I appreciate the good work and the partnership that I've had with you all during my time as governor, and look forward to the same as U.S. Senator.
When you get back to Washington, D.C., lean on Montana Farmers Union. If you need help, give us a call, because we'll be there to support you. Because we want the same Montana you want. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you all very much.